you're a fan of the NFL, then I'm sure you likely play fantasy football. Fantasy football is how so many people get into the NFL, and with fantasy football drafts coming up over the next few months for a lot of people, I wanted to go through and rank 5 reaches and 5 steals based on current fantasy football rankings for the 2024 season. But before we get into the video, I want to take a second to ask you to please subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications. It really helps us out. If you're a fan of the NFL, you'll love this channel as we release multiple NFL-related videos every Tuesday and Friday all year long. Now, let's get back to the video. Quickly, before we get into the players, I have all these rankings based on Fantasy Pros aggregate rankings for half-point PPR, 4-point QB fantasy leagues. So starting out with my first reach, I have Bree Hall of the New York Jets being the number 2 running back off of the boards and the number 6 overall player off of boards. Now, Bree Hall had a very good 2023 campaign. He was the RB4, thanks in large part to a really big contribution to the New York Jets receiving game. He did not even hit 1,000 rushing yards, but with over 500 receiving yards and about 70 receptions, he was able to be very effective in PPR-related leagues. That being said, I'm not sure that Bree Hall will be able to replicate this in 2024. I think in 2023, his receiving stats were widely benefited based on the fact that Zach Wilson was the quarterback with the Jets. It's really tough to believe that Zach Wilson could be a benefit for anyone, but for a running back that's really involved in the receiving game, being the ability to have a check down option for the quarterback like Zach Wilson to be able to check it down to Bree Hall, that's an absolutely massive value that Bree Hall gave. But I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to need that or use that as much. We never really saw Aaron Rodgers massively use a running back in the passing game to the same extent that Zach Wilson used Bree Hall. Yes, Aaron Jones had some big receiving years with the Green Bay Packers, but never to the extent of what Bree Hall did last year. And so I just don't think that Bree Hall will be able to finish as the RB2, especially when last year he still only finished as the RB4 overall. And so I think this is a bit of a reach at the 2nd running back and 6th overall pick. For our first steal, I have James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. He's ranked as the RB15 and the 43rd player overall. And this seems to be where he fell into last year and the year before. So this kind of makes some sense just continuing on. But I think he's going to be an absolute steal because of what I saw out of the Buffalo Bills after they changed offensive coordinators in 2023. James Cook went from being an underutilized player in this offense to being far and away the best running back in this offense. Now, he definitely lost some snaps to guys like Latavius Murray and Leonard Fournette, which every time I watched a Buffalo Bills game made absolutely no sense to me. But I think James Cook will become more and more involved in the offense, especially with some of the receiving losses that the Buffalo Bills had in losing Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis in the offseason. And with James Cook becoming more and more involved in the offense and becoming more and more of a volume player for this team, I think he really will shoot up to being an RB1, as such being a steal at RB15 in overall 43. Our next reach, we have Jamir Gibbs of the Detroit Lions being the RB5 off the board, as well as going 13th overall. And this is a good time to talk about that. This is not a list of the best players. This is a list of fantasy options. I don't think it's a reach to say that Gibbs is one of the top 5 best running backs in the league going into 2024. But I do think it's a reach to say that Gibbs is one of the top 5 fantasy options for running backs going into 2024. And that's because he's in a split backfield. When you're at this type of pick, you want featured running backs. And there's guys like Saquon Barkley and Kyron Williams that are going after Jamir Gibbs here. And those guys are going to be every down backs for their teams and get a lot of usage. And so Jamir Gibbs, in very much so a split backfield where he's getting about 50% of the snaps, he would have to be nearly twice as good as those guys in order to be as effective as them. And while I think Jamir Gibbs is better than them, at least today, I don't think he's twice as good at them, which is why I think he's a reach at the end of the first round, beginning of the second round, like where he's going right now. And in tandem with this, I think that David Montgomery is an absolute steal. David Montgomery is going as the RB18, 13 running backs below Jamir Gibbs, and is going 58th overall, nearly 4 rounds later to what Jamir Gibbs is being picked at. I think that David Montgomery is every bit as involved in the Detroit Lions offense as Jamir Gibbs, and it kind of shows with their fantasy points. David Montgomery played in one less game than Gibbs did last year and has a little less fantasy points. But these guys are used in almost the exact same role just to spell each other. David Montgomery might get a little bit more goal line carries, but that's offset by Jamir Gibbs getting a little bit more ability to play in the passing game. These two, though, do play off each other really well. I don't think the Lions are going to reduce Montgomery's role and increase Gibbs's role. And the way these guys are on draft boards really seems like that's the expectation. And so while I said Jamir Gibbs is a little bit of a reach at the end of the first round, I also think that David Montgomery is a steal at the back of the fifth round. I think these guys should both be a second, third round pick area because they are very similar players who are more effective when the other isn't playing, but are still quite startable when they're both on the field. Our next reach is Marvin Harrison Jr. going off the board as wide receiver 10 at the 16th overall pick. I have never seen a rookie wide receiver go this high in a fantasy draft ever. Like, it's just not something that happens. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is an incredibly talented prospect. I just don't think he's worth this high a pick, especially given the risk. Remember, he's not going to play with Josh Allen or Joe Burrow or Patrick Mahomes or whoever. He's going to play with Kyler Murray. And while Kyler Murray is a fine quarterback, he's not an elite quarterback that is going to turn Marvin Harrison Jr. inevitably into one of the best wide receivers in the league day one. We don't know how this guy's going to translate. We don't know what the risks are. He's not with a super elite QB. And so it's tough to pick him this high in the draft, really in the second round of most drafts. And so I think you can get better value with guys like Rome Odunze and Malik Neighbors if you're looking for the X Factor upside of some rookie wide receivers. But taking that X Factor upside this high in the draft, it's just not worth it. Moving on to our third steal, we have Cooper Kupp, wide receiver of the Los Angeles Rams, who's projected as the wide receiver 23 and the 44th player taken off of draft boards. Cooper Kupp definitely had a down year in 2023, primarily due to an injury he incurred in the preseason, and then Puka Nacua kind of taking over for the Rams as their number one receiving option, at least in 2023. But that does not take away from the fact that Cooper Kupp is one of the best wide receivers that we've seen in the last decade in the NFL. This guy has won Super Bowl MVP. This guy has won the Triple Crown, and he's done all of that fairly recently in the NFL. Cooper Kupp could absolutely come in 2024 and be a top 5 wide receiver, something that you really can't say for anybody else that's being drafted around the same spot as Cooper Kupp is in fantasy drafts in 2024. And if you have an argument that Cooper Kupp is only this low on draft boards because he's a wide receiver 2, and this is as high as a wide receiver 2 can go, then I turn your attention to guys like Deebo Samuel, Devontae Smith, and Jalen Waddle, all of whom are going higher than Cooper Kupp and are definitively the wide receiver 2s on their individual teams. Cooper Kupp could be an absolute steal here if he's healthy. I acknowledge he's a little bit older. Maybe he's lost a step, but his relationship with Matthew Stafford has not changed, and I expect him to be a steal this late in the draft. For our second to last reach, I have Derrick Henry, running back of now the Baltimore Ravens, being the running back 9 off of the board and the overall 26th player off of fantasy boards. Derrick Henry is going to be a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. He's one of the greatest running backs we've seen in the 21st century. He's the most recent running back to put up 2,000 rushing yards. There's nothing bad I can say about Derrick Henry. I have consistently been a massive Derrick Henry supporter. That being said, this is the first time I'm being somewhat negative towards Derrick Henry just because I believe that his position at RB9 is just overvaluing what Derrick Henry is now. Derrick Henry has undergone a lot of wear and tear just because of his usage. And so I don't know if he still has the ability to be a top-tiered featured running back like is almost the expectation with the RB9 off of draft boards. Derrick Henry is going to the Baltimore Ravens, and I think a lot of people think that him in Baltimore will be an absolute match made in heaven. And it very much so could be. But he's not going to get the same workload he even got last year in Tennessee, because Lamar Jackson is going to take a significant amount of that workload. They're going to use backup running backs, guys like Keaton Mitchell when he comes back from his injury, and whoever else they have, because the Ravens just always seem to have an infinite number of backup running backs. And so I'm just not convinced that Derrick Henry will be able to put together a season that results in him being an RB1 in 2023. I'd love to see it happen because it would absolutely lock him in as a Hall of Famer if he isn't already, but I just don't know if he has enough left in the tank to be as good as these mock drafts and these fantasy drafts are projecting him to go. For our second to last steal, we have Sam Laporta, tight end of the Detroit Lions, who's ranked as the tight end 1 and overall 25th. Now, it's pretty crazy, right, to say that the tight end 1 is a steal. And it's not a steal because of the tight end 1, because I think he's definitively the tight end 1. I think it's a steal because of how low his overall ranking is. Remember, the past couple of years, we've seen multiple tight ends going in the first and second rounds of NFL drafts. Guys like Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Mark Andrews, Darren Waller, etc. have all gone very high off of draft boards in their years. And it's because people have started to realize that if you can get an effective tight end that can put up significant number of fantasy points, it is massive value because you're basically unlocking a third wide receiver slot on your roster compared to other teams that are streaming nobody tight ends hoping to just get lucky on a touchdown upside. These tight ends can have equal if not greater touchdown upside while also having significant receptions and receiving yards. And that's what Sam Laporta offers you. This guy was the tight end 1 by over 20 fantasy points last year, while also being a rookie at tight end, something that was thought to be basically a death sentence to being good in fantasy. It's very rare that we've seen rookie tight ends be truly relevant fantasy assets. Probably Kyle Pitts was the closest recent example, who did barely clear 1,000 yards, but only had 1 receiving touchdown. And so with Sam Laporta getting more and more integrated into the Detroit Lions offense as the 2023 season went along, and with him being able to hit the ground running in 2024, I think he could be a steal way higher than the turn between the second and third round. And so I think Sam Laporta is an absolute steal at that value right now. And for our final reach, I have CJ Stroud, quarterback of the Houston Texans, as the quarterback 5 off the board and the overall 45th player off of draft boards. Now, this is not a knock on CJ Stroud. I think CJ Stroud is a fantastic quarterback who can absolutely be one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I would rank him right now somewhere between 6 and 10, but if he has a season similar to what he did last year and even improves on it, he could absolutely become a top 5 quarterback in the league. But that does not mean he's going to become a top 5 fantasy quarterback in the league. Last year, he had this stellar season, and he still finished as the quarterback 11. I think it's tough to become an elite quarterback in fantasy if you are not a really good runner of the football, which CJ Stroud isn't. You have guys like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, and Patrick Mahomes who are going ahead of CJ Stroud. But behind him, there's still really good potential running options like a guy like Anthony Richardson. And well below him, down in pick 60s, you have a Joe Burrow, who's one of the most elite passing quarterbacks in the league. I like CJ Stroud a lot, but I do not think he's better than Joe Burrow, and I don't think he has better receiving options than Joe Burrow has. With guys like Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd, Joe Burrow just has so many options at his disposal, along with being every bit as good and probably better than CJ Stroud as a quarterback, but being picked 2 rounds later and a few quarterbacks lower than CJ Stroud. I think this is just too high a position for CJ Stroud, and it's not a knock on his ability to be a quarterback in the NFL. It's a knock on the fact that it's really tough to be an elite fantasy quarterback while not being a really effective runner of the football. That's it. And for our final steal, we have Justin Herbert, quarterback of the Los Angeles Chargers, who is ranked as the QB 14 and the overall 102nd player off of fantasy draft boards. Justin Herbert has been nothing but a stud for both fantasy and football purposes since he entered the league. In fact, last season, he put up 240 fantasy points in spite only playing in 13 games, and he was injured pretty early in one of those games. That's nearly 20 fantasy points per game while being in an absolute tire fire that was the Los Angeles Chargers in 2023. And yes, I know they've lost Keenan Allen, who was there for most of last year and was very effective for the Chargers. And Austin Eckler's also gone, who in the past has been a really good receiving option at the running back position for the Chargers. But Justin Herbert is still an absolutely elite quarterback, and the fact that you can get him as a QB2 for your team and get him all the way in picks where you're taking wide receiver 3s, backup running backs, streaming caliber tight ends. This is an absolute steal of a draft and can be paired with a higher pick such as Anthony Richardson, who's a really high risk reward guy, or with some later picks who are also risk reward guys like a Jaden Daniels, who could be really effective running the football, but we won't know until we see. So Justin Herbert's an absolute steal because of what you can do with him for your fantasy team. I think he's still going to be a very effective passer of the football, even if he doesn't have great receiving options, just because he is that level of quarterback in the NFL. But that's it for the way too early 5 reaches and steals of the 2024 fantasy football season. If you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications. Again, it helps us out, helps us grow, and will help you support this channel. We'll see you all next time. Peace!